Antonio Brown, possible landing spots. Antonio Brown was in Minneapolis last weekend to watch the Timberwolves game against the Rockets. Antonio Brown, the Timberwolves, had photoshopped a picture of Antonio Brown in a Wolves jersey. Antonio Brown retweeted it and said changing careers. And he also had a picture with Karl Anthony Towns at the All-Star game. I mean, Antonio Brown in Minnesota confirmed, right?
I hope not.
So my question is, so it's probably not going to happen. The Vikings getting Antonio Brown. We're very clear about that. But it's the offseason.
That's what we said about Kirk Cousins.
That's true. That is true. But it's the offseason. So it's a Tuesday afternoon during the NFL offseason. We need content. So should the Vikings even consider going after Antonio Brown?
Absolutely not. There's a 0% chance we should do this. I talked about finding free agents, and well, obviously he wouldn't be a free agent, but he would be a player that's already in the league. This is a guy that just brings negative media attention. We have talked all season about how our two wide receivers are not divas. Thielen showed a little bit of it there at the end of the season. Like you said, I think last week with the Belichick thing and with the Kirk Cousins argument on the sidelines. Not that was necessarily him being a diva. It's just frustration. This doesn't fit Minnesota at all. It doesn't fit Minnesota. It doesn't fit New England. Look at our head coaches. Zimmer doesn't put up with a lot of, I'll call it BS on the sidelines with the team, and Belichick especially doesn't. I've seen reports of him going to New England. I'm like, that's not going to happen, buddy. Belichick will have you out the door within, unless he can do what he did to Randy Moss and make him a little bit less of a personality while he's in New England. But I don't think that this is a good move at all. I think you have a money problem already, and you're just saying, well, we could make something happen and maybe get him on our team. And when I'm saying trade Xavier Rhodes, I'm saying get a first rounder or maybe a second rounder and a late rounder for Xavier Rhodes. I'm not saying get a wide receiver that we already have 2 top 10 wide receivers. And then, we don't need 3 top 10 wide receivers on our roster, I don't think.
But do we, though? And here's the thing. We talked about it. This offensive line is not going to get fixed in one offseason. There is no magical prospect, especially when the Vikings are going to pick at 18, that's going to be there that's all of a sudden going to turn this Vikings offensive line that was below average to really bad into a really good offensive line. So you kind of patchwork your way through. You find really good wide receiving options. You have a team like the Rams, who, albeit wouldn't be this talented, but Brandon Cooks, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods. You have a bunch of weapons. You look at the Falcons, they had a couple years ago with Sanu and Julio Jones and Taylor Gabriel. You kind of look at they had a bevy of options. Detroit Lions, Matthew Stafford had really good career years with Marvin Jones, Golden Tate, and all the like.
Calvin Johnson.
Yeah,
not that they were there at the same time.
They were not, but
talented guys.
The point is having multiple weapons around him. And if you're the Vikings, people say, well, we already have Diggs and Thielen, but remember, the Vikings had Diggs and Thielen a couple of years ago, and they did attempt to go after Alshon Jeffrey. The Vikings had the same offensive line situation then as they did now, where it needed a lot of work. So they figure another receiving option gives you a little bit of leeway. And people say, well, he's still got to be able to throw the ball. And you say, yes, but again, another good wide receiver means you have to game plan differently. That's 3 people you have to cover, and it does change the stakes a little bit. Not saying that it's going to fix everything. I'm not saying that that's going to fix everything, but I'm playing devil's advocate here. I don't think it's going to happen. I've already talked about it before. Like Ian said, there's cap things that could go in there, but cutting Everson Griffin saves the Vikings about $11 million. The Steelers are going to have to eat some of his contract for trading him, and I'm not saying trade a player like Rhodes, but maybe you do give up your first-round pick the next couple of years, or you do something to make it work. Basically, if the Vikings would really want a player like Antonio Brown, they'd find a way to make it work. And again, this team is already against the cap, but it's not out of the realm of possibility to think that obviously Antonio Brown would make this Vikings offense a lot better. And you brought up the negative atmosphere he brings. One could make the argument that says Mike Zimmer has had a pretty good locker room so far. Diggs and Thielen are pretty good guys. And Mike Zimmer is not a Mike Tomlin in terms of just letting your players kind of do whatever they want. there is no Big Ben like personality in that locker room for him to clash heads with. So there could be that. And also, you made the point of Bill Belichick and going to the Patriots. What do you think of Odell Beckham? Because the Patriots tried to trade for Odell Beckham aggressively last year, and the Giants had to stop asking people for offers about Odell because the Patriots were so serious.
So, about Odell, what are you getting at? For the Vikings? Odell,
no, you were talking about for the Patriots, how Antonio Brown would never be on the Patriots. The Patriots tried to get a player like Odell.
I think Odell and Antonio Brown have a different type of flair. Odell isn't really an aggressive diva. He just kind of likes attention, and he has his little temper tantrums. But I don't think he's ever clashed with anybody in the locker room per se. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like he has had run-ins with a kicking net, and more. It's more of his own personal conflict with himself. He gets frustrated that he doesn't get enough targets and whatever.
He did throw Eli and Pat Shurmur under the bus in that ESPN interview.
Yeah, but I think it's a little bit less aggressive than Antonio Brown's was, given the report that Ryan Clark brought up and all that. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, it's not like Belichick couldn't change Antonio, or not change him, but calm him down a little bit. And like you said, maybe not having another personality like Big Ben or Le'Veon in the locker room would help a player like Antonio Brown. And I'm not saying there's not a scenario where the Vikings don't get him and it's not good for us. I just think that right now, looking at it, it doesn't. I don't want to see, and the Jimmy Butler thing is what makes me a little nervous, because Antonio Brown kind of reminds me of Jimmy Butler a little bit, and I don't want to see him come in here, create a bad atmosphere, get a couple players out of here because they don't like his attitude, and then he ends up leaving anyways. And then guess what? We've just lost a couple players. That's the only thing that makes me a little nervous. Plus, we don't really need a wide receiver. That's not our biggest, hole.
I think, granted, too, Tom Tibbs played a big factor.
That might be
in the culture of the Wolves. And I think Mike Zimmer probably wouldn't tolerate the antics of Antonio Brown the way Tibbs allowed the antics of Jimmy to kind of just go on. But yeah, I mean, and again, it's not a need, it's a luxury. But at the same time, you could make the case of saying, in the long run, it does help our offensive line. Because, again, the Vikings' offensive line was, they were worse than a couple years ago, but they weren't that much worse than the line was the year we went to the championship game. It was just the offensive scheming, game planning. So you get a player like Antonio Brown, you get a scheme fit, not a starter in free agency, but you get a scheming kind of depth offensive lineman in free agency. You get a scheme, somebody who fits the scheme in the draft, and then your line is a little bit better than last year. Your receiving core is a lot better than last year, and you put yourself in a really good position offensively. Now one could make, and you could also make some cap room by potentially restructuring Kyle Rudolph's deal, cutting Kyle Rudolph, or doing something like that. Then you'd be out your number one tight end, but it's going to be interesting. And I don't think Antonio Brown's coming to the Vikings, but again, it's fun to speculate.